Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for coming to our session this morning on data privacy, better and stronger together. My name is Patrick Devaney. I'm with ClassLink. And we're doing something a little bit different today. We're also simultaneously recording a podcast that we do called Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. So at the end of our session today, you will see a QR code where you can actually get to the podcast, listen to this and other episodes. And of course, we're here at the Tech and Learning edexec Summit for those that are hearing this first time on the podcast and not actually present with us today. I'm privileged to welcome three guests with me here today. First, Dr. Crystal Ayers. She is the lead education leader of leader programs at Google. Dr. Amy Del Corvo, who is the CEO and executive director at NiceGate. And finally, but not least, Liz Crawford, who is the vice president of partnerships at Instructure. And we're here to talk about data privacy. And I think we want to take a little more holistic perspective on this conversation, holistic in the terms of the overall marketplace, the industry, the education community. And we want to start by talking a little bit about what the impacts of data privacy concerns are. So I've got some questions. We'll use these as prompts if we need to, but hopefully we can just have a dialogue around this. The first question talks about the vulnerability of organizations to cyber attacks and how are edtech companies and schools changing their operational processes. So I don't know if anybody in particular even before we do that, let me back up one step and give you all a chance to take a couple of minutes to talk about your perspective on this topic. What drives you to be interested in this, and then we'll talk to the questions. Okay, just real quick introductions.
Hi, Crystal Ayers. I'm curious about how we can solve this together, like better together type of approach. There's a lot of, there's been over 2,000 in the past year cyber attacks on our schools and our districts. It shuts them down. This is extremely disruptive to schools. One school in particular, district in particular, couldn't even send out emails for about 10 days. It just shut them down. So I'm really curious to know how all of us together can collectively create policy and procedures, principles around cybersecurity, and provide effective training and resources to our staff just to really ensure that our schools are not shut down by cyber attacks moving forward.
Okay. Thanks, Crystal. My name is Amy Del Corvo, and I represent, it's called NiceGate. It's New York State Association for Computers and Technologies in Education. We represent 30,000 educators and administrators throughout the state. So I want to be clear that I don't speak on behalf of school districts, but we do represent many of them throughout the state. And NiceGate's role really has been the go-between between many companies and our school districts. And our overall feeling is that the more educated the school districts are and the more educated the companies are on what parameters the district need to deal with on a day-to-day basis, the better off we all are, because we really are partners in this together. So as Crystal talked about the policies and procedures, we need that now because I think as with the cyber attacks, it is actually paralyzing districts, and you said for days at a time. So the goal is that we will get to the other side of this paralytic state and do it collectively.
Thank you.
And I'm Liz Crawford, Vice President of Partnerships at Instructure. At Instructure, we're thinking very deeply about this. My role there is to manage our partner ecosystem, and we have about 900 tech companies that integrate into the Canvas platform, which is a huge ecosystem. And so we collectively have to do this together to ensure that students are safe, that we can deliver teaching and learning effectively. And Instructure has implemented a lot of different layers around security and privacy. And we're working to be stewards of the information that is on our platform and working with our edtech ecosystem to make sure that they're aligning with our privacy policies, but also thinking deeply about their own and making sure those are published in a way that educators can and find and easily access their privacy policies as they're making decisions about the tools they use.
Great. Thank you. Now we can go to the first question. And actually, I'd make a point. We talk about cybersecurity and the attacks. I think I saw some research recently that indicated that companies are about equally suspect or subject to attacks as school districts are. And if we think about the fact that as organizations, we have data from hundreds or thousands of school districts, it puts into perspective the real need to address this, because the attacks can be increasingly problematic. So with that aside, how is this impacting the way edtech companies and school districts are operating? What's it doing to the operational procedures? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts to start.
I mentioned in my opening that we're just thinking very deeply about security and privacy. Instructure has a lot of policies around this. We have a security team internally that's focused on like forward thinking. We published a trust center with resources around security, privacy, compliance, and reliability. And there's a number of things we're also thinking very deeply about, like how AI impacts this and what does that mean. We've established a committee around not only the internal policies around AI and how we're thinking of the ethical use of that, but also externally and trying to guide the conversation in a thoughtful way and not necessarily reactionary way to some of the new technology trends that are out there. And we love talking about this with our partners and with other industry leaders as well.
Go ahead.
I was simply going to say, on behalf of New York, and again, I understand we are in an executive summit here, but speaking on behalf of the districts, it is so important that companies such as Instructure, and we discussed this last night in planning, the documents and the security that you have in place are critical for school districts, because without them, we are subject to all of our commission regulations, and we've had many privacy breaches. So in New York, we instituted, the commissioner instituted policies called Law 2D. And are any of you familiar with Law 2D? So it's a critical piece of New York, which really lays the groundwork. It's almost like a gatekeeper. You cannot do business in New York, which means you cannot be aided through our state COSARs unless you abide by these guidelines. And it has to do with the release and the governing of not only student data privacy, but also for professionals and APPR work as well. So Instructure came in very handy last year because we had a statewide online learning consortium. And in order to even get through that gate, we need the documents to be provided. So on behalf of the districts, Liz, thank you so much, because that work is exceptional.
Yeah, and so as I start to think about operationalizing this for either businesses and or school districts, some of the things that have already been in place, like just off the cuff, that probably everybody in here already is doing, like the multi-factor authentication and encryption, end to end. There are some things that we can definitely roll out that they don't even cost a dime to do, which is training. So as you think about asking teachers or giving teachers the that they need in order to not click on that malicious link, those training elements if we have those like a bank of resources and create these tools and accesses for districts, we can provide equity to all of our districts across the United States to really be able to provide robust training so that we don't, we're not as inclined because we do have another measure between the educators themselves and what we've operationalized at a district level. But training and resources, employees just really need to be to understand the potential of those cyber attacks and be aware that even just clicking on that little link in an attachment can really cause tremendous damage. I think with security assessments too, I think it's important that we can identify the vulnerabilities within our districts and either safety patch that immediately or provide some type of pathway in order to solve for that proactively and not reactively. So looking at those different layers of security assessments that you might have, and obviously, Google is like super security, but like it's something that is near and dear to every aspect of Google is privacy, safety, security practices. They've operationalized, to the extent that is pretty bank grade encryption, right? End to end. So anything that larger districts, larger companies can share out collectively, I think would be extremely beneficial, especially when it comes to resourcing.
So there's a lot of things that are happening. How is that pushing into daily business? You know, how is that changing the way districts ask for products or things that they demand? What's non-negotiable now? I see more and more RFPs come out that have requirements, data security requirements.
Mhm.
Does that impact how Instructure sells?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the resources that I mentioned, as well as all of the like transparent reporting that we do annually about the platform, and as I mentioned, just being general like stewards of student data. I mean, our customers are expecting that from us with all of their teaching and learning tools and their content and student information and courseware and everything that sits on our learning platform. It's just really important that we have those multi-layers that I mentioned. And I think that schools are expecting that. I think that's an expectation. And so it's a non-negotiable around security, privacy. And they also ask us a lot about the efficacy of edtech products. And so I think those three I'm seeing that as a non-negotiable that we're hearing a lot about from our customers.
Great. Well, and Amy, you already mentioned EdLaw 2D which is not just a district demand, but it's a state requirement.
It is a
now
requirement.
in order to spend state funds.
Yeah, New York actually took the role a number of years ago after a large corporate security breach took place. And simply, we will not allow businesses to work in New York State without it. To the point that our organization, with your help, I will add, is actually working with companies to educate them on what needs to be done. Because we want companies to do work in New York, and the educators want your product. So how do we build that bridge in between what they want, yet the requirements of the district needs? Because you're fighting between educators who are truly there for the instruction of students versus real life, bank level security issues at this point in time. So somewhere in the middle, I think that's where there's a tremendous opportunity for that private public partnership.
I was just going to say, another thought here is we're adding additional layers of demand or requirement in order to push forward the required security. How's that impacting our ability to take advantage of what technology can bring? Is it, are they mutually exclusive or can they coexist?
Well, I think AI is going to push the buttons on all of that. So every discussion you have, I think people that control the technology end of it are terrified because they simply don't know at this point in time. Yet there's a lot of awareness discussions going on. So, Crystal, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know we talked, and this is your specialty area.
I don't know about that, but yeah. No, I think in edtech there are so many districts. First of all, when an edtech company comes to, there are procurement aspects of that now, right? So it's not 10 years ago, we really didn't worry about all of this. And now there's like really intense procurement requirements. And if not, then like that would be something that a district should actually look into, right? Like you don't just take on an edtech company now anymore without really conducting vigorous like security assessments for that particular vendor, requesting information like what's your security measures? What happens when, do you do end-to-end encryption when you're transferring PII data and multi-factor authentication, things like that. But using cloud-based edtech solutions really provide us with that ability to scale, right? And that's something that edtech companies need to do. It's kind of flexible and easy management. And then as we look at like deploying artificial intelligence for this is where I think we can really leverage AI to assist with this. So if you're looking at AI or large language models to automate your security tasks, it takes the human out of that particular component. You can identify potential threats and really allow your IT people to focus on what's truly important for them, which is instruction, right? Is to ensure that they're supporting teachers and students. So you have these mechanisms in the forms of dashboards that will alert if you choose to go that way and deploy artificial intelligence or some type of edtech to show immediate threats to your environment, any risks that are associated to that, so that those people can, the lights just start flashing and they're able to jump on it immediately, as opposed to a human spending hours every single day combing through the information and that is potential threats. So this kind of takes that human element and will automate that for them using artificial intelligence, so that IT people can do what matters, which like work with our students, work with our teachers, and ensure that all those laptops that are sitting on those cards actually are working, right? And that computer lab is actually working for their students and teachers.
You know, that's an interesting point, because I so often hear about AI as a threat to security. I don't very often hear about it as the solution to the security challenge. So that's fascinating. I haven't heard that before. Also, one of the biggest challenges that we have with security is the user. And you had talked about this as training in the beginning. The user community is the one that very often is the source of how a breach occurs. And using AI in that capacity, we had a whole thought of AI coming up and how could we change. How has Instructure talked about AI with regards to data privacy and security?
Yeah, I think we're trying to take a very, as mentioned earlier, very thoughtful approach to AI, and not reactionary, but the ethical use of it internally as well as externally, and how it exists on our platform and how we're using that data. And we protecting student data is part of any of the AI tools that we either integrate with the platform. We've published AI guidelines and other tools and resources for our partners and for our customers. And so, but I think the approach that we've, there's been a lot of reaction to AI in the sense of like a ton of companies are out there developing tools around this. And we are taking just a much more thoughtful approach and maybe a little bit slower while still implementing AI on the platform, but just taking a little bit of a slower approach and making sure that we're really thinking through all the impacts of that. And internally, we do have AI guiding principles and things that we're following internally. So that could be something that I think the industry as a whole could be thinking about. What are the guiding principles around AI to keep students safe and to ethically use AI for teaching and learning, and not other malicious ways.
Real challenges with the ethical use of AI. We had a different podcast about that, so I don't want to dwell on it anymore right now, but it's fascinating to see the extremes in terms of how it can be applied, how it can be beneficial, and how it can be harmful. There was another topic that just came up a little bit before we were talking around data privacy. Often under the guise of data privacy, other initiatives are advanced. Things like opt-in and opt-out and parental involvement and awareness. And, very often they're presented as issues of data privacy and security, but in fact, they really are advancing in a different agenda. Policy starts to come into this. And what are your thoughts on the risks or the challenges of trying to provide solutions in advance, or do we wait for policies to come into place? It's a real quandary, but I don't know if Amy, you might be the one that sees that a little bit more in terms of the schools.
Well, we do, because we represent the students. So we're again on the other side of it. But again, with the Commission of Regulations, there's a parental bill of rights, and it's parents do have rights to all student. They have access to all student data if you're under the age of 18, and they have the right to say what is released and what is not released. And there's a 60-day window to have a response from the Commissioner's office directly, and every inquiry is posted on the website. So it's very transparent. What I will add is when all of these regulations first came out, it was a massive challenge and a hurdle for school districts. And again, everything that you know about districts, we're short on quality CTOs. We have a superintendent shortage, a teacher shortage. So this seemed to be one additional hurdle that we all had to cross. In reality, a few years looking back at it, is probably one of the strongest, but probably one of the best things that we did, because we set the bar. So that is our standard level that you have to meet requirements to do business in New York. And if we can, Patrick, talk about that standard bodies that we referenced last night, because I think if we did that on a national level or even globally, it would really help the companies that are trying to do business with the schools on a day-to-day basis.
So, great question. What standards bodies are going to help with this? No, not at all. I mean, we don't usually use these for a discussion, and I mean, I think they're helpful, and they kind of slow us down a little bit, maybe. But what standard body is the right one to work with? Is there one? Are there many? I think at the core of this is, how do we get to a common agreement or a common approach, a common perspective to try to solve some of these problems? If we have something that works, how do we advance it? Are standards bodies the right way to do that?
I'd like to ask our audience today, how many of you use standard bodies now, or even know what we're talking about with standard bodies? Okay, so half the people. So yeah, I mean, it's an organization that really helps to develop and promote those security standards, guidance and training, and all the things that are associated with that. I'm most familiar with the edtech Cybersecurity Consortium for support for schools and districts. But they've got them at the federal level, the state level, down to the district level as well. And I think if we can support some type of, as a collective audience, come together and determine, like, what are the policies and practices, similar to the slide before about AI. Everybody right now across the nation and probably globally is grappling. What are the principles that we need for AI and the policies and procedures for that? This conversation for cybersecurity is like 50 times more important than the AI conversation. So we're not having it at scale. And I think it's because it hasn't, even though we had like 2,000 breaches in the United States last year, in districts alone, I think it was like 45 school districts were impacted. We're still not, there's not that sense of urgency. And I believe that's because it doesn't directly impact a teacher. So AI directly impacts a teacher and the retention and recruitment issues that go along with that. The cybersecurity is like not necessarily impacting a teacher to that extent. And so there's not that level of concern. But I think everybody in this room would agree, this is an extremely important topic. So how do we engage others? How do we raise the level of awareness around this? And I think standards bodies is one way of possibly working within that system.
Do we wait for them, or do we advance our own thing, our own initiatives?
We cannot wait. You have to be proactive. I think it's similar with AI. You've got multiple organizations that are putting together principles, policies. You've got all types. And I think once they come together and like put it under one umbrella, and you can have different little spokes under your umbrella, that's fine. I think in that same vein, if we start creating our spokes, then perhaps there'll be a body that takes us and go, yeah, let's do this and incorporate it here. Somebody that has deeper pockets, so to speak, than myself. So
I made a mention. ClassLink has created something called the Cybersecurity Rubric, and it's something that we've created and we've made available to educators, and we can even certify them if they're interested in that. I think that's a good example of something that a player in the industry creates, advances, it's beneficial for the industry, and that we can contribute, we can kind of give back. I often say that working in this space is a privilege, and we have to operate with a higher standard because we have the benefit of contributing to the community and to the system, our communities. Other examples? Do you have other examples of things that companies are doing specifically that are not necessarily tied to a bigger thing, but they're doing it because they believe it's the right thing to do?
I can speak to a little bit about what I'm thinking about in my role. So as I mentioned, we have hundreds of edtech companies that are integrating into our platform. So around interoperability. So Instructure, the makers of Canvas, have always have the philosophy of an open and interoperable platform. We still continue to have that philosophy, but we have to think about the interoperability standards that allow that to happen in a really safe and secure way. So we do think about developing and certifying to the one edtech standards, and just understanding the commitments around, like the open standards that enable the teaching and learning to take place. And so there is an expectation that our partners who integrate into the platform are also following the open standards. Another question.
Well, this kind of brings up at the heart. We've had a lot of mentions about working together, and wouldn't that be better? Can't it be better? Because I think there's a common approach of everybody looking at this is a problem that I have to solve for me, for my group, for my company. But it's a bigger problem. It exists. It's throughout the whole industry. We have to find a solution to it. So how do we advance that thought that we do this together? We're in a competitive space. Many of us are probably from organizations that compete against others in some capacity. And the school districts are trying to do the best that they can with the resources they have. How do we find ways to work together to advance data privacy and support this as a group, as a community? Any ideas?
The issue is, everybody's affected by it, whether you're a company trying to sell a product or you're a district looking to purchase a product. So I think, as we talked about earlier, the more educated and aware we all are, it really helps. That's what we were talking with the standard bodies. A lot of times these regulations, these policies are made in reaction to either some type of a breach, a bad press conference, something along those lines. So if there is a way in the education community, and I mean, you're all friends, right? How many people do we know around this room that have worked either with previous companies before? And I think everybody is here in this. I would like to think that this field is different than most in that regard, because everybody truly is in it for the good of the students in the school districts. So I certainly don't see a point in time where people are going it alone. So honestly, what I would love to see, some of the larger companies, and we've got a lot of them right here with the three of you, the larger companies working with a lot of the startups that are coming in, because you have many of them coming in that have developed apps, not even full-blown, system-wide management systems. And really just, you have to have somebody that pulls it together. The cybersecurity framework is amazing. It's a great start. The data privacy piece, although New York has regulations, every single state is dealing with the exact same thing, every single school district. And when we hear about it is when it hits the news. So I do think the time is now, and is as proactive as we can be, because we're already behind the gun on that.
I like that point you made too about just, I think, leading by example in the industry. So like Instructure or Google are leading by example with our ClassLink, all of our layers of security and things that we're thinking about. It leads the industry forward. And I think if we're thoughtful about the partners that we work with and the standards in which it means to be a partner of ours and those types of things. And since Crystal's here on the panel too, we also, Google integrates into the Canvas platform. So we're working with other market leaders, big and small. Also, we have a ton of startups that are integrating into the Canvas platform. And so I think the position of leading by example and working with other partners and companies that have the same level of expectation and quality around security and privacy is really important.
And having like a shared vision, having it all within one area, I think is like your shared vision. You've got your standards, you've got your resources, you've got your training materials. If we had all of that within one location, then I think we could overcome, like to your point, like some of the hurdles. So some of the hurdles do in fact come around awareness, resources, and really cooperation, right? So how do we raise awareness for this? We talked about this just a few minutes ago. Just looking at maybe developing and distributing some educational materials on data privacy for schools, for districts, maybe having some webinars or conducting some trainings around that for staff. and even within our communities, hosting some events to inform our parents, right? Like it's super important for the people at home also to have that information. Sources that maybe we have a repository of some sort where we're all contributing to it, right? We're not like competing with each other, but it's a common repository that as we create resources, why would you have to duplicate efforts and vice versa, so that we can have this shared mentality and really be able to collaborate with large edtech companies to really provide us with those resources and make it so that it's accessible for everybody. I think is just a few of the ways that we could possibly overcome some of the hurdles that we currently are seeing.
One of the things we're doing as well, I'm sure you know that in December, Instructure acquired Learn Platform. And Learn Platform has an edtech library that has listings of thousands of edtech tools out there. But the listings and the profiles actually highlight their privacy and security standards vetted against some of these big standards boards. And so educators, schools, districts, other edtech vendors can go in and search and find privacy policies and security policies around edtech. So just wanted to mention that is one tool that we offer to schools and districts to find that information.
There's I think a really good example of where working together really can help. There are a number of resources that are used around different applications. ISTE has a library of resources. One edtech has trusted apps, and they've done some analysis of resources and their security and quality, et cetera. The Student Data Privacy Consortium has an agreement where for data privacy, and if signed by one, should be shared by all that sign it. But there's no common identifier of applications, so there's no way to automate or no way to link this information together. And when you're looking to advance the cause, that's a great place that you could focus on, try to drive it forward, and if you can, now you bring greater wealth, greater richness to the whole conversation. So and then there are many, many more of those types of examples. I think there's another, we talked a little bit about it before, but policy and, Ed Law 2D came around because of In Bloom and some other things. But if not for In Bloom, we wouldn't have the interoperability that we have right now, right? So we have to advance this. The challenges around policies are they could be written improperly. They could be problematic. They could, throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we have to find ways to motivate our peers in our community to advance this without waiting for that to happen, because that's kind of like the worst case scenario in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
There are other organizations as well that I know that many of you belong to, but CETA is a great place for that, because when you're working with the policy writers for each of the states in this regard, CETA, COSIN, there's a bunch that would be a great resource, but also can carry that within their states.
We've talked a bit. Does anybody else in the room have a question? Anybody want to bring up a topic? Throw out another thing to talk about here. Barrett, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess with regards to New York. So New York is one of these states that's trend-setting, defining privacy and rules around that in more rigid ways, I guess, among the states. Is there a perceived gap even within New York doctrine of data security that gets talked about? Do people in New York feel safer, or do they still lament, we don't have this, we don't have that?
This is being recorded, so I'm going to be very careful in my wording. I think what EdLaw 2D did based on the corporate breach was really, it brought the awareness to every school district, every parent, and every company that this is an issue that we need to deal with. And although you mentioned the company that brought it to the attention, that led the work for many, many, many behind it. So there will always be gaps, especially, in our wonderful state. However, what came out of it was, again, the EdLaw 2D piece, which is critical for any any company to do business in our state. The Parents' Bill of Rights. Every single district has to have a DPO, a DDC. It really elevated the importance of dealing with data at a district level. In many districts, well, we have 735 districts in New York. Over 300 are small to medium size. So it's not as if those resources exist at every district. So in some districts, you have the principal that's wearing the hat of the DPO at the same time. But it is required. And I think what it did is it put it on everybody's roadmap to look at, because you have for as many large scale companies there's twice as many small ones trying to break into the market. So again, if it did nothing else, it's at that level bar that you have to meet these requirements to do business in our state.
I think the gap also is in so many different areas. You think about data privacy, it impacts diversity and equity, and inclusion. It impacts employment. It impacts the entire spectrum. So I think you're going to find different gaps in different areas with regards to how secure the data is. Now, the size of the district that you live in, the affluence of the district that you live in. Are you able to afford the same protections and support in those places as others?
The health of a school board or the support of an administration. They all weigh into it.
Absolutely.
And I think to add on, like from an edtech company perspective too, is really thinking about that the privacy laws that exist, like are the floor, and we really want to strive for the ceiling. So I think the laws that exist out there is everyone's trying to reach and meet those requirements, but that's really the floor. And we should be thinking about how much more we could do and how many other layers we can implement into our products and into the way that we operate and protect student data, PII, everything. So I think thinking of it more of like, that's just the bottom, but let's strive for better than what the floor is.
Great point.
Yeah.
Well, and we have to think about data privacy. We care about the students. We care about data privacy. They're one and the same. There's not a difference there. Great question. Other questions? Anybody have anything else they'd like to throw out?
Amy mentioned that there's a lot of companies trying to make money, and I work with a lot of when I change, there's a downward here. We used to have here's where you can sign special company coming in from outside of the U.S. That it's all a learning curve then on this any cheat sheet or primer or anything like that you'd like to.
So we are, Joyce, my dear friend, we are our corporate counsel, Patrick, dealing with our BOCES that write the state COSERs. We're actually putting together a few sessions, both virtual and in person, to do just that. What is Ed Law 2D? What are the minimum standards? What are the minimum privacy standards that you have to do? Because again, it's just the awareness piece that many of them don't know. So yes, Joyce, with the help of many of our corporate friends, we are putting that together, and it's absolutely necessary. I've said for many years, we make it very, very difficult to do business in New York, but as I get older, I understand why. There is a reason, and I respect that reason. One of the pieces, if I can go back again, sure. You floored me with your comments about AI. I actually wasn't even viewing it from a systemic approach, how it can assist us. I'm viewing it from the user approach with the deep fakes, with the what happens to data at that point in time. That is, and what some of these students are doing with AI now far surpasses that of many teachers, like most of things in technology. So it's the other side of it that concerns me more. So I don't know if you can you could put my fears to rest at all with that, but I grew up there, and I understand I'm as old or older than many people in the room. When we were in school, they would post your social security number with your grade outside the doors in the high school. I mean, you think about that now, you hear the gasp in the room. So, but as we evolve, and that's one thing. So we set the minimum standard. It's going to continue to evolve. and the technology is going to continue to evolve. I was part of a discussion last week, actually in Long Island, regarding an art competition utilizing AI tools, and should AI tools be allowed in that competition or not for various reasons. And ultimately, they decided to create another category, which is where things are going to be moving. But on the AI side, I think that's going to change the discussion even a year from now.
You come to my session at 2 today.
I am coming to your session.
I don't want to like make this about AI, but yeah, there's a lot of benefits, a lot, and there's we can definitely subside your fears. Don't you worry.
I was going to add to Amy's comment. I did find a college paper I wrote 25 years ago, and I had written my social security number on the top corner of it, and I found it like in a memories box, and I'm like, oh my God.
Did you shred it?
I shredded it. Yeah, but that one other AI point too is also how the models are using data to train those models, and that's concerning too. So if students are entering their information, data, questions, things like that, that can, depending on the AI tool, help train the model. So there's some data concerns there. And I just think users of all kinds need to be really careful and understand how the AI tools they're using are using their data to train their models. And so I think that's just another aspect of AI that's concerning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good question. I can't really comment on it right now. We're in the process of integrating Conmigo into the Canvas platform. That was announced at the end of July at Instructure Can. But we are doing that integration work right now. That will be aligned with Con on the AI usage models, and we're currently working on that.
Any other questions? We have time for probably one more. Anybody has any? Yeah.
After the privacy security improvement, what about insurance companies? The districts have really struggled with meeting their requirements, and do some larger organizations, do you have any influence, or do you work with the insurance folks who are making certain requirements to get insurance at the district?
Great question. In case somebody didn't hear in the back of the room, it's about insurance and districts struggling with insurance. And are there any corporate or industry efforts to help schools get cyber insurance? You're not aware of any?
I don't know. I'm not privy to that information.
Amy, how many districts in New York have struggled with cybersecurity? Do you know? So are they required to have it?
I'm not sure if it's a requirement by the commissioner, but many of them are purchasing it collectively through their BOCES, through the ESAs. And it's not at a small, insignificant price factor. I will share that with you.
Right.
So it is an issue for everybody.
Anything that Instructure is doing that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm not saying we're not doing it. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. I know we've had conversations about it and don't have a clean answer as to how we can contribute, but it's certainly an issue for them.
Like everything we talked about, it's usually the ones that were hit by an attack.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that jump right on because they need to. Many in the central New York area this past year have been hit. But the time to do is before, not after.
Well, yeah. Then there's going to have to be some kind of a collective approach to this. Clearly, we don't have one right now, but there's something in order to solve. This is something that can't be solved in a vacuum. Any other? All right. Well, this has been a rich conversation, very genuine and appreciated. I think it's very clear that data privacy and security reaches all aspects of education, beyond as well. It's something that we have to do at a minimum, want to do more, in truth. I think that we're all committed to that. I believe that if we I think I heard us say today that if we can find ways to do this together, we can make greater impact. We can make it faster and stronger. If we can standardize it, we can have even farther reaching. But we're not doing enough. We need to do more. We need to find ways to do more of that. We also can't afford to wait for policies to come around, because if we do, we probably are going to suffer with those in a different way. So anybody that's bringing in, and to Joyce's comment about startups coming in, I know that in my role, I talk to many of them very often. They say, oh, I got to get into the world of interoperability and I have to be able to do some of these functions, and they call ClassLink. And we do often spend a lot of time talking to them and trying to inform them and educate them on what the issues are. It's particularly relevant when you see companies coming from other countries, because they have such very different rules, such very different policies around how it's going to work. I think, and we talked about it, but we didn't talk about it. I mean, we talked about AI continuing to have an impact on this, both from a negative and a positive perspective. I think that's a takeaway for me. But I think this is going to get even more pronounced as the automation around data exchange increases. And it has to, in order to support our evolving society. The problems are going to get bigger. So much like with reading, the sooner you teach the kid to read, the better the impact is going to be. If you wait till later, it gets to be a bigger problem. So sooner is better, and together is better, I guess, are probably the two takeaways. So with that, I think we're out of time. I think we're supposed to stop at 10. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.